I'm Kristen Noel, and I'm editor-in-chief of Best Self magazine. And this week, we decided to try something different for our blog. And I decided to rope in my good friend, Jeffrey Davis, who is not only a Best Self co-creator, but and also all-around pretty awesome guy. And he's got some groovy socks on today. And we decided to sit down and bring forth a conversation. And I just want to introduce Jeffrey. He is an author, he is a speaker, and a brand and book strategist. Who better to rope into a conversation on a Saturday morning at the last minute in the offices of Best Self than someone with a business named Tracking Wonder, and also someone who writes about how creative people find possibility in times of challenge and change. Just to give a little bit of background to how this whole conversation came about, Jeffrey and I both attended a community meeting this week, actually just a couple of days ago. And this is all post-election and very heated. This meeting had an intention of opening up and creating a space for people to express their feelings. And I just want to warn you, this is not a political conversation. This is really a human conversation. And we spoke after that meeting, and it sparked something for us. It wasn't something that was touched on in that community outreach, but it was about what is the conversation right now, and where do we go post-election? This week is Thanksgiving. How do we sit down at the table with perhaps people who have different viewpoints and perhaps voted in different ways? How do we speak to our children about that? How do we interact in our communities, and so on and so on. Just to let you know, Jeffrey and I have no idea what that conversation is or what the answer is, but we're willing to go there and to try to spark something at least within ourselves, and perhaps to do the same for you, so that you can have these conversations and that you can bring this forth to your Thanksgiving table and to your family, to your dinner table, and so forth. So that's my blah, blah, blah intro. Does that pretty much give a synopsis of how this came about?
I think it does, yeah. Specifically, you and I were curious about how to have a conversation with somebody who doesn't necessarily hold the same views as you do. There's one thing to talk for you and I to have a conversation.
Right.
It's another thing for me to talk with somebody who's coming from a completely different reality at this time and place. And that's what welled up for me too during that meeting, is knowing even neighbors right here, 50% of them might have held a different view come election time.
Right.
Those people your son is going to school with.
Right.
How do we have conversations with them? Some people right there at the Thanksgiving table may have different views, different realities than you do. I was reminded, in kind of thinking about this conversation, is that the day after the election, my first impulse was actually to take a camera, and I almost took my iPad mini and a tripod, and I was going to go to different towns around here and just say, what's your response?
Wow.
And try to find as many different people as
Right.
I could. And I think that was an impulse because I wanted to connect with the ocean of humanity
Right.
and all of its diversity. What do you bring to the table, as you put it? Thanksgiving is coming up. How do you have that conversation, a thoughtful conversation with others?
Right. Well, this also came out of, this was inspiration because I received a call from a friend of mine who said, look, I'm freaking out. I'm having a big Thanksgiving dinner with a diverse crowd of people I love, and we can agree to disagree on certain things. And she said, I'm just going to say, hey, look, we are not discussing politics. Then she said, I got prepared to say that, and then I thought to myself, that just didn't feel authentic, because we have to have a conversation, whether it's at the Thanksgiving table or it's this week or it's next week. We have to have a conversation. And yes, this has been the ugliest, the nastiest, the most divisive political, presidential campaign. But what worries me most is the divisiveness that it is creating within our families and our schools. And you touched on my son's high school. 50% of it voted one way, 50% of it voted the other. And they're very passionate about it. We have to be accountable for how we're going to guide ourselves and our families and our children.
And our children, absolutely. And part of that is, how do we model having a conversation of differences?
A tough conversation.
A tough conversation of different realities. I think it starts with genuine curiosity, in a way, to really be genuinely curious about somebody else's reality. I am less inclined to rehash the election campaign. I'm less inclined to talk about any candidates, because most of us, myself included, tend to project all of our feelings onto these candidates, and we will say what we want to say, but they're really about our feelings,
right,
about other things that are greater than that candidate. I can think of a couple of family members, and I would be curious about what they're afraid of.
Right. Well, are you going to have a diverse
Probably
Thanksgiving
not.
experience?
Probably not.
Okay, so you're lucky, maybe.
Yeah, but I may call
Right.
some family members to have that conversation.
You said you have some of those family members.
Yeah.
So if those family members were going to be sitting down at your Thanksgiving table, how would you, because you are a fabulous instigator of conversation and guiding groups, how would you guide that dinner table conversation?
I would check in with myself first. And I'd really check in to see if I really feel open and ready. Because I'm not open and ready, I'm just setting myself up for disappointment and anger and frustration. So I really check in. Am I even in an open space? Am I ready to hear somebody else's...
Something I don't want to hear, maybe.
Something I don't want to hear. And don't think I want to hear. And so then I have to think, well, what do I want to hear? I've taught myself a number of things over the years.
I was going to say, can you just let us know how are we doing this checking in business?
One is, I taught myself some wisdom I remember reading from a Chinese master that said, the sage listens with his feet. And so what that does is it drops your attention, literally. So sometimes I will keep part of my attention on my feet while I'm listening. Mm-hmm. What does that do? It keeps me from trying to pigeonhole what they're saying and, but I've got to correct that person. But the other thing that I really...
And you just said something really important. I don't want to gloss over that. I don't want to correct that person, because immediately we're not really listening. We hear something we don't want to hear, and it's immediately like, well, what's the retort for that going to be? So that's a really also important point.
That's the heart of the point. So what I mean by an open state is you're curious and you really want to hear somebody else's reality and different emotional reality. So I also repeat to myself, because I am pretty introverted, and I also know some things about just how we're wired to close in and box in and defend ourselves because we're mammals. I repeat to myself, open up instead of size up. Open up, don't size up.
Oh, that's great.
Open up, don't size up. And I repeat this over and over again. And when I notice that I'm about to react to something, I just open up, don't size up. And it helps, believe me. And you just listen.
Right.
So I think you have to think about, okay, what are the kind of neutral questions you could ask each other? What are you afraid of? What do you really want? Can you really listen? What are you afraid of for this country? Could you take it to that level? What do you really want for this country? And could you really hear without?
Right.
But wait.
And also, I think also with this election in particular, it was like people would latch on to one issue in particular. But what they didn't realize, because perhaps it didn't pertain to them, is that there are people that are terrorized by this decision and this election. So I just want to know, how do we connect back to just our basic humanness? How do we connect back to the fact that oh my God, I'm really sorry that you're terrorized by this. I mean, like, what can I hear? Even though, I may not agree with who you voted for or whatever, but this is what's actually terrorizing me is the disconnect of humanity.
What do you mean by when some people are terrorized by this decision?
Perhaps immigrant, feeling that they're going to be, deported, right?
Yeah.
Our LGBT community,
Yeah.
just any kind of homophobic, racist.
Women in the workplace.
Women in the workplace, women's rights, young women.
Yeah,
Listen to the young women
yes.
that were at that meeting.
Right.
Really afraid that Uncle Sam is going to make the decisions about their reproductive decisions.
So this is an important piece, and there will be diversity, I hope, at our Thanksgiving table, but not sort of across political lines. So I think this is the other piece, which is how do you have conversations with people of different ethnicities, different sexual orientations, and really, again, like, hear their story. So what my African American friends and colleagues and clients tell me is just listen.
What is it? Open up, don't size up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really
really listen.
And really listen and really feel it. This is hard for us human beings, again, because we say we're compassionate, and we are.
We cry at movies.
We cry at movies, but it's really
right.
like there is a gap. So kind of one of the wondrous...
And a disconnect.
Well, one of the wondrous things is we'll never fully know each other. We won't. And we won't ever fully know one another's reality. It's just the curious thing about being human, but we keep trying to cross that gap. And how do we cross that gap? By continuing to listen, imagine in such a way that you viscerally feel that other person's reality, which is really hard. In a way, it can seem easier if you're kind of on similar political leanings. Sometimes you think it's easier to enter somebody else's reality who's of a different race than you or a religion than you, but it's not, because you really don't know what that person fears walking down the street that you take for granted
and never think about.
Or in the workplace
right.
or at school that you take for granted.
Yeah, about this experience in my son's school this week. A couple of kids just got into it and were very cruel and vicious to each other, and one spit on the other, and racial slurs were going back and forth, and it's just intolerable. And then I say, okay, so where did this come from? It came from the home, it came from overhearing parents, and it came from the media.
My older little girl is not in that situation. If she were, I know I have, I'm a little guy, but I have pretty pronounced guard dog instincts. I know that I would move toward that difficulty pretty quickly. And I would have a conversation with the parent in that parent's living room. I would invite myself over to that parent. I would.
So what would that conversation look like?
It would look just like what we're talking about. I wouldn't talk about the incident.
Right.
I wouldn't talk about our children. I would say, what's going on? What's going on with you? What are you feeling like? What do you make of all this that we're in right now? I wouldn't say, what are you afraid of? Because that would put the other man or woman on the defense. I don't know them well enough to ask that question. But I really would start with some questions that I would really try to find a way in, not to be manipulative.
Right.
And also, this is the other thing, not to come to some sort of outcome that I want. So when we talk about difficult conversations, like if you're to Google or look at the literature on difficult conversations, it's usually workplace related, where the manager's going to have the difficult conversation with the disruptive employee, and we're going to have this outcome, right, that we all agree to. I think you have to enter these conversations differently. There may not be the resolution that you want. And so what's the purpose of having that conversation?
Well, you spark something, right? You spark something, you plant a seed, you connect, You know, when we sit down, I mean, we've all been in that situation before. Like, for example, in this world of electronic media and you know, this digital world where we can sort of hide behind our electronic communication, you know, you can really battle it out with someone.
Yes.
On email or go back and forth, texting or whatever, and you lose that humanness, you lose that connection, right? And there's something that happens when you get face to face, and suddenly you're not so rigid and so hard, and you're not so tough, and you sort of melt in that space when someone says I'm sorry or someone hears you. I think we really all want to be heard, right? So it's, you know, it's like that, like Van Jones sitting down in a room with people on all sides of the conversation, all sides of the table, right? And he really just kind of kept going after people and saying, let's just unpack that. Let's just go even deeper, because I don't think you really believe that. And it's that human, you know, it's that sitting in the room together, part of it that's so important. And I love the prompts that you've given, which, you know, help us like prevent the escalation, you know, because we could easily just say one thing and then boom, you know,
Combustion. And food is a good common
Yeah.
not alcohol, because
Yeah.
alcohol will skew things. So you
Yeah.
got to make sure over
Up or
Thanksgiving
down, right?
that you're
Exactly.
not talking. Right? Are you going to have a diverse table at Thanksgiving?
Yes, somewhat. Somewhat. And I'll be honest with you, I really was originally of the ilk that, well, let's just leave that off the table. Let's talk about everything else. We'll talk about turkey and blessing and what we're grateful for. I think the conversation's important. How I would have it, I know that I also would have to check in and make sure that I was in a space where I wouldn't be triggered. Just sort of ask myself, like, am I capable of handling not being triggered? Because if I'm going to be triggered, that's not going to go anywhere productive. But I do think, again, if we can't have the conversations with our families and with the people that we love, and if we can't get underneath that and really share our feelings, and see, but that's the real thing. It's like getting down to the basics, like, what are you afraid of? You know, don't throw, oh, it's the taxes, or it's the this, or it's that. Just don't, you can't cherry pick, because this is about humanity, right? There was one thing I just wanted to read. I had no notes or preparation for this, but this morning I was reading Elizabeth Lesser's book, Marrow. And I'm a huge fan, as are you, of words and metaphors, like everything, life experiences, metaphors. And I read this, and she's actually using it as a metaphor as well, but she was referring to this marrow transplant. And actually, you know, when you are giving in blood donations, the concept of rejection. She is speaking of rejection and attack. Rejection and attack. That's what we so often do when we see each other as different, when we feel threatened, out of our safety zone, or just clueless about how to share the human experience. We interpret difference as danger, and in covert or obvious ways, we reject or attack otherness. Sometimes we pull back, we protect, we shut down, we reject. Other times we try to control the other, bend the other, and when we can't, we give in to our fatal attraction to aggression, we attack. Even when we adore each other, even if we know better, even if we make it our moral practice to tame the tendency to reject or attack, these are difficult instincts to overcome.
Yeah. You know, it came up for me are two things. One are the metaphors of argument, which are all about battle, and maybe we need to come up with new metaphors, which are about really turning with each other, which is really the root of conversation, which is to turn with each other instead of attack each other.
Yeah.
Open up, don't size up.
Open up, don't size up. Yeah. That's going to be one of my prayers on this Thanksgiving table. I'm really thankful to have you in my life and to be instigated by you and to know that I could pick up the phone and say, hey, Jeffrey, I have this crazy idea, and to have you jump on board and come over here. And how would you want to leave us with like a Thanksgiving wish?
What I hope is that really this particular Thanksgiving is that every person listening or watching learns something they didn't know about one of their family members.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good. Because we think we know everything. That is so good. Yeah. And you're going to have to hear and listen to do that. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
You're awesome.
You too.